Good afternoon, everyone. This is Steve Tiki. I'm one of the leads of the Globus project here at University of Chicago. And I'd like to welcome you to Globus 101. We're going to spend a little time here today teaching you about all the capabilities, new and older, that we have in Globus, and sort of give you a tour of what we've got. A couple of thank yous and introductions on the call. So first, I'd like to thank Henry Neiman and his team for sponsoring this event and helping us get this all put together. It's been really great in working with them to get this going. Also on the call, or on this webinar, we have Vas Vasiliadis from the Globus team. He will be monitoring the chat channel throughout this webcast. And if you have questions or anything like that, put them on the chat channel, and Vas will be able to interrupt at any point and add them to the stream. Vas, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Of course, I also want to thank our many sponsors for Globus, right? Globus, as background, right? We are part of the University of Chicago. We're a nonprofit providing software to the research community to help you as your scientists and research computing centers with the capabilities that we need to get our science done. And we're sponsored by a lot of different government agencies, private foundations, and companies and the like. So we always want to make sure we thank them for their great work. We also want to thank all of you that are on this call that are also already users. We've had a great deal of success and help from the community in getting to where we are, right? So we have a lot of, tens of thousands of users, almost 200 petabytes of data transferred over the last 6 or 7 years on this service, many institutional subscribers. We really have a great community around us. And for those of you who aren't yet using Globus, hopefully by the end of this call, you'll be on and running and can add you to these numbers. So what I'm going to do with this webinar is start with an introduction to Globus, talk about at a high level what it does, and then I'm going to spend a lot of time doing a live demo, really showing you, taking you through the service as an end user, showing you how to really use the capabilities available to us, and then come back and talk around some of the more advanced capabilities that we have. And so to kick this off, let me give you a high-level overview of what is Globus, right? So as I said, we're a group out of the University of Chicago with a mission of providing high-quality software to the research community, and our specific focus is around research data management. How do we provide tools to our community to help scientists and engineers and staff in the science community, manage its data through the research data lifecycle? Over time, we're building up an increasing set of capabilities to that end. What we have today is what I'll talk about in this slide and what I'll be showing in the demo shortly. Right, so the first capability that we introduced with the Globus services about 5 or 6 years ago now is what we call file transfer, right? Managed file transfer service, right? So this is schlepping my data around amongst all the different systems that I have access to, right? As a researcher at University of Chicago, now I have access, of course, to University of Chicago facilities, its HPC Computing Center. I have access to national facilities like Exceed. I have lab and division facilities. I have, of course, my desktops and laptops. I have cloud servers, all these different systems that I have accounts on, that I have data on, and I need to move data to for various purposes. Maybe pulling data, as in this picture, off a scientific instrument and getting it into my HPC facility, or downloading results from my facility to my local lab system or my desktop so I can do some visualization on that, or uploading to national facilities, right? So throughout this, this webinar, when I talk about transfer, that's what we're talking about. It's that these systems that I have accounts that I can log into, moving those files and those folders from A to B at high speed, with good security, all managed so that, when faults happen, we recover from it. Really try to provide, no muss, no fuss, get your data from A to B well and fast. The next capability we added some years back is what we call sharing. And really sharing is transfer across users, right? So its typical use case here is that I have, of course, access to the University of Chicago Research Computing Center facility, and I have a bunch of data stored there. And I'd like to share this with you all, right? Maybe with everybody on this call or on this webinar, maybe with specific collaborators, maybe publicly, maybe privately to just one other person, right? But I want to be able to share really easily data off of this facility without requiring all these people I'm sharing to have to go get accounts at University of Chicago, right? I want them to be able to sort of come in and use and get access to this storage kind of as a guest, but with access control, full security around that, all controlled and managed, and then be able to transfer data out of the facility. And if I've given rights, even to upload data to my folders at the University of Chicago, right? So that's what we call sharing, right? Which allows the researcher to come along, select the files and folders that they want to share to other users, say who has permissions, granted to particular users and groups. Globus takes care of the access control in all this, and ultimately then allows another user to come along and get access to that data directly from that system. The next capability that we'll talk about today is publication, and it's the other side of the coin of discovery. So publication, up to this point, transfer and sharing is all about my files and folders. My terabyte data sets, or my gigabyte or megabyte data sets, or my petabyte data sets, right? We've operated all of those scales with Globus in the real world today. But it's all about files and folders transferring and sharing. But of course, I want to often do more than that. I want to, for example, write a paper, and then make the data set for that paper available to another person. I want to associate metadata with those files and folders to help people discover it and understand what that data is. I'd like to assign persistent identifiers like digital object identifiers with that data set. I'd like to have curated collections of data. So what Globus publication allows is all of these other workflows around this data transfer and data sharing to allow data to be published or made available with all these other trappings around it to the community, so that this can get published, so that other researchers can come along after curators have reviewed and approved it and discover it. Search for data sets based on the metadata, find interesting data, and download it if they have access control to it, right? So it can be public data, it can be private data, but publication is all these other workflows around that. And so I'll show that also a little later in the demo. Now Globus, it's a cloud service, right? Software as a service, very much in the sense of a Netflix for video or a Gmail for email, right? We're a cloud service providing research data management software, as a cloud service, as software as a service, that you only need a web browser to use. We also have, as I'll talk about later, command line interfaces and REST APIs, so that you can integrate this and script and things like that with the services as well. But as a user, really all I need is a browser. I can point it at it and get going. So that's what I'll be showing a lot in the demos. Second thing about Globus is it's all about access and use and managing the storage system of your choice, right? We aren't a cloud storage service. We don't provide storage ourselves directly like other services, say like a Dropbox or Google Drive or these sorts of things, but rather the model with Globus is you bring your own storage or decide what storage you want. You connect your storage to the Globus cloud, and then Globus really is a management and orchestration service over that, providing all these advanced capabilities against your existing storage systems and making use of them. Third is access using your campus credentials, right? Again, our target here is the research ecosystems, universities, national laboratories, groups like that. And we have, fortunately, high-speed networks, which is great for all this data, but we also have rich, but also sometimes too rich, identity management capabilities available to us, right? I have accounts, of course, at University of Chicago, on Exceed, on many other facilities, on my own systems, right? And I have to be able to navigate through all this. So Globus provides all that and allows you to do that tied in well to, for example, your campus credentials. So we'll see that shortly as well. So a different way to think about what Globus is doing is it's providing campus bridging. It's providing this bridge between, within and beyond your campus boundaries and your lab boundaries and your department boundaries and even your personal desktop and laptop and cloud storage, all these different systems. It provides this capability to bridge across all of this. So for example, right, you can use Globus to bridge out to national cyber infrastructure. If you have allocations on Exceed or national facilities like NCSA with Blue Waters or NERSC or others, Globus provides capabilities to allow you to bridge out to and from these facilities, to get your data out to these facilities, do your processing. Maybe you're doing analysis, maybe you're doing simulation, so you want to bring the results back to your campus when you're done, right? It provides services for that. Equally, we see bridging within campuses. So Globus started more around access to the national facilities, in and out of those, but we're seeing more and more where it's getting used even just inside the campus networks, where the campus maybe has a research computing facility, with data storage, with HPC nodes, things like that. But of course, most campuses also have data all over the place in other department servers or lab servers, desktops, laptops, out in the cloud, right? All these things. But so providing this interconnect even within the campus to allow you to conveniently and easily move and manage your data around within that setting, we see a lot of increasingly with Globus as well. Bridging to instruments, right? There's lots of different scientific instruments out there, from on the high end things like the national facilities, the light sources, the ALS, the advanced photon source at the national laboratories, to all the gene sequencers that are, of course, springing up all over the place these days, microscopes, all sorts of different scientific instruments that are producing increasingly voluminous amounts of data. And so again, how do you manage that data? How do you get that data out of the facilities into the places where you need it in order to do analysis of that data or long-term archival or storage of that data? And so again, Globus providing this bridging capabilities. Bridge to your collaborators, right? I talked about sharing in my intro slide, right? About my ability to take data that I've got and share it with my project team and with my collaborators so that I can get them the data so that we can work effectively together. And doing all that with good quality security and access control. So it's not all about just making my public data, it's about controlled, restricted, secure sharing as well. And bridging to the community and public, right? With our publication tools, for example, right? A canonical use case there is I have data that I need to make publicly available associated with a paper or a grant, right? Which is increasingly required by the journals and funding agencies. How do I do that? How do I make this data available so that people can find it and come see what it is and download it and reference it with our identifiers, right? So again, Globus providing the tools to manage that life cycle of bridging data to the public and the community. So as a user, right, as a scientist that has data issues, why use Globus, right? What are some of the key reasons, to use our transfer and sharing and publication, right? So first is ease of use. Right? We provide very nice web interfaces. We provide consistent user interfaces across all of these different storage systems, right? Not just the supercomputers, not just my desktops and laptops, but as we'll talk later, we're bridging to more and more cloud systems, archival systems, other things like that, right? So you get this ease of use consistently across these many different types of storage that are out there. Fire and forget file transfer, right? Ultimately, you don't want to be babysitting your data. When you're moving large amounts of data around, you'd like to be able to say, go do it. Here's this folder with 20 terabytes of data that I need to get put over there. Just make it happen and tell me when you're done, right? And that's really what Globus is. That was where we started, and that's really a core feature of what we're about, is doing that with high performance, with security, but also fully managed with reliability, fault tolerance, things like that. Maximize WAN throughput. Right, we're blessed in this community with high bandwidth networks. Many universities going from gigabit to 10 gigabit and even 100 gigabit network uplinks from the campuses up to Internet 2s. We've had lots of great work over the last several years around science DMZs and data transfer nodes and how you really plumb your networks end to end to where it's needed, to your campus research facilities, your instruments, your storage, things like that. But you also need the tools that can make use of that whole infrastructure, right? And that's a big thing Globus provides you is it takes this theoretical bandwidth available to you at the tens of gigabits per second and actually makes it practical so that you can get those sorts of data rates when you're transferring data around on your systems. Secure access with a multi-tier security model, right? Arguably we made our name with Globus early on, particularly around this combination of data with security, understanding how to really do high quality security federated across the sites and have things really work end to end properly with security. So that's a big part of what we do. No low overhead to external collaboration, right? Really trying to remove these barriers that are often imposed by our infrastructures, like you have to have an account at the University of Chicago HPC Center to get any access to data. Well, that should not be an impediment to collaboration, right? So providing tools that make it much easier to collaborate amongst these teams and share data and disseminate results and the like. Rapid deployment with standard packages, right? We've done tons of work to really make Globus easy to use and deploy on your own personal systems, desktop laptops, as well as on server systems, Globus Connect server. And so I'll even be showing the personal version a little later in the tutorial. Highly automatable, right? Beyond our web interfaces for the ad hoc use, as I mentioned, we have command line interfaces and REST APIs that allow you to do much more interesting scripting and automation around the capabilities of Globus as well. Now, those are mostly benefits from an end user perspective, but there's also very big benefits to facilities who are adopting, or I think the administrators who have to put Globus on their systems to make it available to users. Right? It's one of the big benefits of our model, of the software as a service model, and how we've built the way you connect your systems to the Globus cloud, is that we've made it very, very easy to connect your storage to the Globus cloud and then get these capabilities for essentially no IT costs, no operational administrative costs against that, right? It doesn't take lots of people time to run Globus, right? So from users' perspective, point a browser at it, there's no software to install and maintain and update. From admin's perspective, same advantage, right? Very easy for them to use. We even have features that I'll show really targeted towards the admins. And ultimately, from an admin perspective, it's that last bullet of reduced IT operational costs, right? Most research computing centers and labs and departments, you don't have the people, and you certainly don't want to be spending lots of people time running the software to do this stuff, right? You want something that just works. It requires very little human time to keep running and make available to your users. And that's a huge benefit that we provide with Globus. So with that, I'll pause first, ask if there's any questions on the chat that Vas wants to pitch in with before I go into demo and while I get set up for the demo here.
Yeah, we have a few questions, Steve. Maybe we can save a couple of them for afterwards, but there was one question about how is data secured and what's the procedure for breaches of data?
Well, so the first comment again is that the data, we don't store data, right? The data is living on your own storage system, subject to the local access control policies and that sort of stuff. And so the model with Globus is that there is access control required to get to that local data, and then we, of course, part of our responsibilities as running a cloud-based service is to run a highly professional service that operates this service, and so we've had, for example, operational reviews from various security groups, from Exceed, from the Indiana Center for Cybersecurity, who've looked at our operational practices and our architectures to ensure that we're running this service properly, right, securely. And so ultimately, you can say comes down to two things. One is, we need to run things securely on our side. And then it's really up to the sites and the users to define what sort of access control they want to make available make files and data available under, and we enforce that.
Okay, thanks. There was also a question about if we have any benchmarks for testing data transfer.
Well, Yes, we do. We actually published a paper a few years ago where we ran a whole bunch of benchmarks around data transfer rates. I mean, the problem, of course, is that benchmarks are benchmarks and the real world is quite different. And so the main statement or gestalt, I would say, is the takeaway from from the benchmarks and the experience of our users is that ultimately Globus is not the limiting factor. It tends to either be the networks, and thus all the work over the last several years around science DMZs and getting clear network paths so that you don't have all of the friction in the networks to bandwidth. But second is storage systems. Often what we're seeing, especially now that the networks are coming into place well, is that it's more often than not the actual storage systems that's the limiting factor on this. And even high-end parallel file systems, the amount of bandwidth they can deliver at any given node, it tends to be fairly limited. So you really have to first off think in terms of bandwidth is what's the end-to-end path that is available, and we continue to work with the community on making sure that there are good end-to-end paths from storage systems through data transfer nodes, through networks and routers and backbones, and provide the tools. And assuming that's all working, as most sites do, then we can essentially saturate whatever you've got. As an example, we're actually working on a demonstration right now for supercomputing. For those of you there, come talk to us more there, showing sustained 100 gigabit, well, about 90 gigabit per second data rates over 100 gigabit networks, wide area between real systems, storage to storage, right? We can do that. That's not a problem for us. And routinely, we see many gigabits per second on between well-connected, beefy systems, big storage systems and the like. But of course, if all you've got is a little DSL at home, that's all we're going to get out of it.
Okay, there are quite a few more questions, but let's move into the demo, Stephen. If you can just pause after you show transfer, there'll be a few more relevant questions at that point.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. So let's jump into demo. So let me switch over to a browser window here. So what we're looking at is, of course, the Globus homepage. We're at www.globus.org. And let's go ahead and log in. Right. So the first thing we'll see on login is that you need to pick your identity provider, right? So a key thing with Globus is that unlike many cloud services, right, the first thing often one has to do with a cloud service is go create yet another username and password for accessing that system. And in fact, that's how it used to be with Globus even. But we've rolled out over the last year new capabilities where you no longer have to do that. You can just use your campus identity or other identities in Globus to access Globus. So in Globus, we've already got sort of order 150 different identity providers from InCommon. If you're an InCommon site, for those of you who know what this means, if you are InCommon site releasing research and scholarship attributes to CI login, then you show up in Globus. If you don't know what that means and your site is not on, feel free to contact our support team or your campus identity folks to help do this. We'd like to keep getting more and more folks on here. But we have a search built in, so you saw, if I search for Chicago, there's various ones. You see Michigan, various universities here. So lots of universities in various national facilities like Exceed. So you can use your Exceed user portal username and password to log into Globus, or your NERSC if you're a DOE NERSC user. We also have Google. So you can actually use your Google account, your Gmail account, or your Google Apps for education, for example, accounts on this. Right, so lots of different ways to do that. And as a fallback, if you were a previous Globus user and had a Globus username and password, that's what we now call the Globus ID. But that's just another username and password that has no special meaning anymore to Globus. So let's go ahead and log in with my University of Chicago. So I'll select log in with the University of Chicago. And you see what this does is it redirects me over to the University of Chicago site, right? So you see the domain name up here now at University of Chicago, right? So this is using all the InCommon federated identity capabilities to log in. So now I can just type in my University of Chicago username and password, click login, and it'll redirect me back to Globus, and I'm logged in, right? And if we actually look at our account up here, we see that my Globus account, my primary identity, is Tiki at University of Chicago. And, I had logged in previously with this, so it knows me. But we also, one of the challenges that we run into very frequently in our community, of course, is lots of identity providers, right? I have accounts at University of Chicago and Exceed and NCAR and many other places. So one of the capabilities Globus gives you is the ability to link these together so that Globus can kind of do the right thing, especially downstream when I talk about sharing. This comes into the fray. It allows me to link together these different identities and think of them sort of an equivalence set, right, of identities. So I'm logged in using my University of Chicago. Now let's go ahead and do a transfer. Right, so the first thing I do is I need to select an endpoint. Right, an endpoint is simply a storage system that's been connected to Globus, right, using the Globus Connect software. And so at this point, we have, I think, somewhere in the order of 50,000 endpoints connected to Globus. Most of the national facilities, we have several hundred universities that have endpoints connected to Globus, a lot of international usage, right? So I can do searches. So let's go ahead and look for Chicago. I know at University of Chicago, the name of the cluster is Midway. The University, oh, there it is. Okay, so now I see University of Chicago's Midway system is an endpoint on this. Now I have Exceed endpoints. So if I say I'm an Exceed Gordon user, I can just start typing Exceed Gordon and things show up there. And you see we have partial word matching and all that. There's also information associated with each endpoint that you as an administrator can provide, things like a description and keywords and stuff like that to help your users find your system. You want to make it so when they start typing words that they naturally make sense to them, like in my case as the University of Chicago, let's see what the U Chicago ones are, right? Help me find my endpoints. We also, as you see in here, have bookmarks, right? So I can do things like take an endpoint that I commonly use and even a particular path within that endpoint and bookmark it so I can easily come back to them. And then I can have my own endpoints. I'll come back to that later. So let's go ahead, recently used. Let's pick that University of Chicago Midway. So we're now going out to University of Chicago's Research Computing Center, right? So this is a standard HPC cluster running a GPFS file system, right? Where I have my home directory and project directories and all that sort of stuff, right? So I log into that system and you notice it did not ask me for a username and password. The reason for that is because I logged into Globus using my University of Chicago credentials. This particular endpoint is expecting University of Chicago credentials. So Globus is smart enough to give you end-to-end single sign-in in this sort of scenario. But suppose I were to go to another endpoint where I haven't been to recently, like I'll go out to Exceed Gordon. In this case, I haven't logged in recently, so it's going to ask, you need to log in, right? So a key property of every endpoint is what's the method of authenticating with that endpoint. Just because an endpoint is connected doesn't mean anybody can just use it, right? You still have to be able to authenticate and have the proper access rights to it. So in Exceed's case, let me go out and authenticate to that endpoint. And you see now, it redirects me back out to Exceed, to the Exceed site. I use my Exceed username and password, my Exceed portal password, to log in. And the key thing, of course, here is these usernames and passwords are not going through Globus. Globus never sees these. It's all staying at your university or at Exceed or at these other identity providers. But we're able to make use of that and use that to get logins to these systems, right? So now I've got logins sort of cached in Globus to University of Chicago and Exceed. I could go to other Exceed sites now and Globus is smart enough to just use that same Exceed credential at all the Exceed sites. I don't have to do that with each endpoint I touch. So now I'm there logged into a couple systems, sort of classic 2-window browser transfer folder. So each of these sides is a browser. So I can do things like, say, we'll go into my project. If I double click on that, I can explore into that. I can create folders. I'll say create a folder experiment 3. I can rename folders. I can select ranges of files by shift selecting or control select. Allows me to do things, go up and down folders. As you saw, we have a little pancake menu here that we can also do extra operations like renaming files and folders and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and say, let's take this folder and that file, and let me go ahead out here on Gordon and create a new folder called webinar. And then we shall go into that folder as soon as it comes back here. Go into the webinar folder. I've selected a folder and a file that I want to transfer. I have some options I can set down here. So I can set a label on every transfer, like my first transfer, just to help me find it later if I want to check for it. We have various options for synchronization. So for example, these three options together are essentially equivalent to rsync minus AV minus delete if you're an rsync person, right? It allows you to transfer if you're have replicas of data between two sites and you want to update one site based on the other, you can use these sync options to do that. By default, we always do extra verifications of transfer. One of the hard lessons we've learned over the decades of doing huge amounts of data transfer is that when you get up to petabytes of data, things fail, right? And there is undetected corruption at all aspects of the systems, whether it's the networks, the storage systems, the RAID controllers, our software. Right, and so we do this extra step of rereading everything back, verifying via MD5 integrity checking to make sure that we really have transferred things correctly. And we see this for real in the wild show up in Matter. And then encryption, by default, everything's authenticated, but we don't encrypt data transfers by default because it has significant performance penalties as you get up into gigabit and 10 gigabit types of data transfers. And for a lot of areas of science, I don't really need to encrypt my data, right? It's, I want to make sure it's correct and everything's happening, but I don't have to go to that extreme. But of course, in other areas, I do need to. Maybe I'm transferring around human genome sequences. So in those cases, I do want to encrypt on the wire. And so you can turn that on a per transfer, or an endpoint can basically set an option saying, always encrypt to this endpoint, override, I don't care what the user has done, right? So I have various options, but let's go ahead and do a transfer, right? So I've selected a folder or file. I hit the arrow up here, and that submits the transfer, right? So you notice it says transfer request submitted successfully. Doesn't mean the transfer is done. In fact, in the corner, we can see here the green recent activity, one active task chugging along, right? The model is very much, in some sense, like a HPC cluster job, right? It's a job that you submit. In this case, we submit to the Globus service and say, you take care of it. Right, hand it off, I can log out, shut down my browser, log out, go away, come back later, check status, and basically say, you take care of it, tell me when you're done or when there's something I need to care about. There's some faults that you're not able to recover from, maybe ran out of disk space or things like that. I can come back at any point and check the previous activity. So there you can see my first transfer, it's done. It was just a small transfer, is this first one. I can drill in on that further, see more information about it. So I can see information of how many bytes were transferred and effective speeds and all this sort of stuff, number of files. We even have detailed event logs where I can see detailed information about how things are proceeding, including progress, stuff like that. And if there are faults, we log them. So you can see what's going on. And as we'll talk about later, your admins can also see what's going on so that they can help make sure things are really working end to end. Right, so that's my first transfer with Globus from University of Chicago cluster to Exceed, right? So these were existing endpoints out there that I could log into, that I had accounts on already, that I could go to, log into, and submit a transfer. Now maybe I also want to do more like upload download scenarios. I'd like to get data to and from my laptop, right? So in the case of these two endpoints, there were administrators of these storage systems who installed the Globus Connect server software, and there's a lot of information out on our doc site if you want to see more on that, including, for example, a how-to guide, wrong guide, on installing, how to install Globus Connect server against your multi-user system. But we also have something called Globus Connect Personal, which is designed to allow your desktops and laptop, your personal machines, your Linux, Macs, and Windows desktops to be connected to the Globus cloud as well. So let's go ahead and do an install of that on my laptop here. So you see the Get Globus Connect Personal here. Let's click that. Right? Anybody can create an endpoint, connect it to the system. So I'll call this my MacBook. Generate setup key, and we'll copy that key. We have, as I said, binaries for Mac, Linux, and Windows, tested on a lot of different versions of these with installers for each. So let's go ahead and download the Mac version. Open up the downloaded installer. If you're a Mac user, this should all look super familiar to you. Standard kind of drag and drop install into the applications folder. Yeah, let's go ahead and replace the one that was there. Not a surprise, there's already one in my applications folder. Clear that. If we go into applications, look for the Globus Connect Personal and run it. Yep, let's go ahead and open it. Paste in that setup key from the page that was over here when I gave it its name. And we are up, right? So you notice there's a new icon up here in my menu bar, right? This is Globus Connect Personal. I've now installed this little agent, just runs in the background, right? It's not a client. I never interact with it directly through, as a thick client or anything like that. So it's kind of like these other services, like my Dropbox or my Google Drive, right? So it runs in the background, connects my system with, of course, this one critical difference. At Globus, we don't do that cloud sync model thing because the volumes of data often involved just don't work. That sort of model syncing through cloud storage doesn't really work for that. But for example, I can control through the Globus Connect what access this system, the Globus Connect has on my local system. So maybe, by default, we have read-writable access to my home file system. Let's change this. Let's make it readable to my home. Let's make, let's see, I have a temp or share folder in here somewhere. There it is. So we'll select that. And we'll make my share folder both writable and shareable. And I'll show what sharing looks like in a little bit, right? Or maybe I have a separate USB disk that I have attached to my system that I want to also make available through the Globus service, right? And so I have control over what portions of my system that Globus can even do anything with, right? And that's all enforced locally here on the system. And if I don't want that one, I'll remove that one again, right? So now, having done that, we go back to the transfer service. Now, say I want to go to my MacBook. There it is in my endpoints. You see, it sort of looks an awful lot like my local laptop because it is. It's just coming back in through that. And now, for example, I can say, let's go into this share folder, create a new folder here called webinar. Go into that folder. And in this case, let's download, I don't know, let's download this Greg folder. I don't know what's in that, but. All right, so again, I fired it up. If you're looking closely, you can see a little spinny disk here on my Globus Connect showing up here. And again, wasn't much data in there, but there it is, right? So that's a download from University of Chicago Research Computer Center to my laptop. Now, a couple of comments about the Globus Connect Personal is it's designed to work as an individual user. So you notice it didn't prompt me for my system password when installing Globus Connect Personal because it runs as the user, only as that user. So you can install it on your Windows and Linux boxes. There's even command line versions of the installation, for example, for Linux. So you can install this on a remote Linux box via SSH, right? Second is it's designed to work behind NATs and firewalls, right? To make it so that, even if I'm sitting at a Starbucks or at a network where I'm behind some network stuff, it still works. It can do all the necessary, transfer magic to make sure transfers will still succeed even in those cases. Third, it pauses and resumes appropriately. I can explicitly pause this here to say, pause any transfers currently underway. Or if I just shut down my laptop or go off network, any transfers to this will just pause. And then next time the laptop connects, they'll pick up right where they left off and continue going, right? So it provides this very convenient way to, again, move significant amounts of data in and out of my own systems. Right? So that's Globus Connect Personal. I mentioned bookmarks already, just to finish off that part of it. We have a manage bookmarks page, and I can do this. So suppose over here, Chicago Midway, I want to bookmark this collection, right? So all I have to do is hit the star here. I can get it my favorite collection. So I've just created a little bookmark for that. Now you see it show up in my bookmark list over here. I can edit it. I can link to it from anywhere. Or again, if I'm guess there's nothing actually in that folder. But if I go in and search for something, I can say there's my favorite collection, select it, and it takes me right to that spot. Right, so bookmarks, hopefully like you'd expect. All right, so that's transfer. I'll pause here for a second. Bass, any questions you want me to answer before I go into sharing?
Yeah, we actually have a ton of questions. I'm going to try and get through just a few of them now that are more relevant to transfer. So firstly, you showed how to set up a personal endpoint interactively. There's a question about, can you do this in an automated way? There
is, I believe on the Linux and Mac versions, there is a command line interface for installing the Globus Connect, where effectively what there is a command line where you run, think Globus Connect personal setup and pay and with the key. And then through the REST APIs, if you want to automate the actual getting of those setup keys, you can do that through the REST API. You can essentially say everything you're seeing here, everything I'm demoing in this transfer service is all using our public REST API. So effectively anything you see me here do with respect to transfer and sharing and login and all this sort of stuff, you can do yourself through our APIs as well.
Okay, another question is, does transfer leave some kind of digital footprint?
Other than the file itself, no. We don't currently do anything like manifest files or things like that. As part of the publication service, there's some aspects of that come into the fray where we save out metadata and we're starting to add some of these sorts of capabilities. But today, no, nothing beyond that.
And the question about how do files get deleted and related to that is then, do we do any life cycle management?
So to the deletion, let me go ahead and delete this folder. I don't like this collection. In fact, let me go ahead and clean up while I'm here a few of my old crufty things that I've kind of got left around from demo. So I can do selections here. And you notice one of the options here is delete selected items. And what this is also a job model. I can give it a label if I want, but I can say submit it. So if we go over the activity, we see there's a delete job happening here, right? So even if there's huge amounts of data, it has to walk huge amounts of folders, it'll do all the right thing, right? So that's how you delete data. We do not really there's no built-in lifecycle management capabilities to the service. Again, this goes right back to the APIs, the REST APIs and CLI, is to allow you to build these sorts of things in yourself. And there'll be a bunch of future work coming from us to add more and more of automation sort of capabilities more directly into the interfaces as well.
Okay, and question about whether Globus stores data on the cloud before transferring it to the destination. Absolutely not.
No, we a big part of our model is precisely not to have to go through any intermediary hops, right? That all these transfers I've been doing, like when I went from Midway to NERSC or Midway to Exceed Gordon or to my laptop, are always direct from source to destination. Globus does not. It doesn't go through the Globus service. It doesn't go through any intermediary storage. It's always direct between the source and end, mediated by Globus, right? So we're able to monitor it and provide for the fault recovery and all that, but yet get all the benefits of the high-speed networks and everything between those two systems, right? And this is one of the, for example, even within your campus use cases, or better yet, even in the data center use case, one of the uses of Globus out there is in NCSA's Blue Waters supercomputer, one of the largest supercomputers out there. The way users move data between the Lustre high-performance computing file system and the HPSS mass storage tape-based archive, both of which are huge systems that are about 50 feet apart from each other in a machine room, is via Globus. And they sustain, these are tens of gigabits per second routinely between these and going up quite a bit higher than that with full end-to-end verification. And it can do that precisely because we aren't in the middle.
Okay, a couple more questions on transfer, and then we'll move on. So when the transfer is happening, is it utilizing grid FTP and multiple channels and such?
Yes, we're using all the same. For those of you who know grid FTP and all the fun things that it does in concurrency and parallelism and all that sort of stuff, yes, Globus automatically does all of that. And we also even allow, as an endpoint with Globus Connect server, you can actually install multiple servers, multiple data transfer node servers in front of your storage system, all as part of the same endpoint. So for example, I think this University of Chicago Midway is actually 2 servers. I know Gordon is several, and you go up to NCSA, their Lustre file system has 50 data transfer nodes or something on that order, but it's all in the same, to the user, they don't know or care. It's an endpoint. I just talk to it, and Globus will automatically do load balancing and failover across all of that. And then Globus will also provide, just to show it now because I wasn't going to show it any other time in the demo. So if I go, for example, out to, let's go to Gordon. A good one to try again. Right, one of the things that as an administrator I can do is also tune my network performance. So I can basically say use network so minimally, normally, or aggressively, which even tunes the concurrency and parallelism. And then Globus has heuristics for, based on the 2 endpoints, choosing good values to do all that to really optimize your transfers. Whole point is you shouldn't have to worry about any of that as a user.
Okay, and then just one last one for now. Can you do periodic or automatic sync of files, or must the transfer be manually initiated?
You can do periodic. Well, I mean, you would do it yourself through the REST API or the command line interface in cron, right? So we don't have anything currently in the interface anywhere here where, you could imagine. It's not opening it because I deleted that folder earlier. Where down here, being able to say do it periodically, that's on our list of things to do, but we don't have that yet.
Okay, so Steve, I think you're going to move on to sharing next. There's a couple of questions related to that as you go into it, just to bear in mind. It's a question about how to configure an endpoint to be persistently active so it doesn't expire, credentials don't expire. And then where's the metadata managed for the sharing and permissions?
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Sorry, just before you move on, so folks, we have a lot of questions, as you can see on the chat, about deployment and other detailed scenarios. We're going to try and get to most of those shortly. Thanks. Keep them coming.
All right. So let's now talk. So what we've done so far is transfer, right? So recall that's just the first upper left corner of that first slide of schlepping data around amongst systems that I can log into. But of course, the next use case I mentioned is I've got this folder here, the My Project folder, and I would like to share this with VAS and other people, other collaborators, right? So, if this were a Word file, right, some simple small file sitting on my laptop, I would drop it into Dropbox, click a few things, type in VAS's email, and sort of, he'll get an email with a link. He click on, magic happens, and he has access to that Word file, right? So how do we make it that easy? Ignoring Dropbox and the whole sync model and all that sort of stuff, but in terms of the simplicity, how do we make it that easy for me to share my data sets that are living on systems like my campus cluster or my desktop or laptop or my lab servers or my national facilities, right? With my collaborators, with access control and all that. So let me show how that works. This is what we call sharing in Globus. So we've got this My Project folder out here at the University of Chicago. The administrators at University of Chicago Midway have turned on sharing. They've said, we allow sharing against our endpoints, these sort of thing of guest access, if you will, to these folders, subject to the access policies that users set. They can even control more fine-grained things like only allow sharing from certain folders and stuff like this. So, if you want to set up policies that say, as an administrator, only allow sharing from / public folders, you can do that. Or if you only want to allow sharing from your project folders, but not your home directories, or read-only sharing from your Scratch file system so that simulation results can easily be shared out, but they can't modify things in your Scratch file system through this sort of sharing interface. All of that is controllable by the local admin. That's sort of setting the bounds of what I as a user can do. Now as a user, I come in and say, I got this folder here, I want to share it. Let's go share it. So the model with sharing is the first time I want to share out of a particular space, I create what we call a shared endpoint, right? So I'll call this the webinar share. And I can put descriptions, tiki stuff, and keywords and that in here. And what I've done here is just created, really think of it as a virtual path to this same bit on disk. I haven't haven't copied anything, haven't moved anything, right? I've just said that if somebody tries to go to this endpoint called webinar share, what they're really doing is going to Midway my project, but kind of as this guest sort of capabilities, guest user through the sharing interfaces, subject to access control managed by Globus, right? So I've now done that. So now I can share out to other users. So for example here, I can say, let's search for VAS. And so I see VAS has various accounts here. I as the sharer, get to choose, what identity I want to share with. So let's go ahead and share with his University of Chicago, with his University of Chicago identity. Our identity system knows, that in this case, that there's an email associated with it that happens to be the same. It wouldn't have to. So like an Exceed account may have a different email. And, I can put in a message that shows up. Right, so I've now shared this folder with VAS, and you can think of it from two perspectives, right? One, if you've ever used, say, Google Docs, what I've just done is very much like sharing a Google Doc. So VAS, if he were to log into his Globus account, he would immediately have access to this shared endpoint if he's logged in to account with VAS at OU Chicago linked to it. Second, he's got an email sitting in his inbox that he can click on a link that will take him right in and walk him through getting in, even if he's never logged in with VAS at OU Chicago before, right? So just to show what that might look like is I'll show that in a moment, we also have full group support built into Globus. So very commonly what I'd like to be able to do, of course, is share, say, with my project team, with my collaborators or the team, over time, and I may want to add and remove people over time. So Globus has built into it a whole group management system that allows me as an end user to define my groups, things that matter to me, right? And so, for example, I've created this Tiki project team group here. It's a pretty small little group, but I've got a few things in it, including, looks like Stu's actually waiting to join, one of my guys. So let me go ahead and accept him into, whoops. This must be an old invitation. So no, never mind that. Rachna is shared. Let me also go ahead and invite another user. So logged into a different browser over here. You see in Safari browser, I'm logged in a different account, right? Account to SJT, called my SJT account, that has different identities linked to it, including, for example, tiki@anl.gov, tiki@NERSC, right? So this is a different user, different account, all that with Globus. So let's go ahead and invite tiki@anl.gov. I can search for it, or if I just want to add it, I can just do that. So let's go ahead and invite tiki@anl.gov, and you see the identity system's smart enough to know that that identity is actually associated with a different email if the identity provider is telling us that. So we'll go ahead and invite tiki@anl.gov to join this Tiki project team. So if I jump over to this account and go over to the groups, I should now see an item in my work list, and I also have an email waiting for me in my system saying that I've been invited to join this group. Great, let's accept the invitation. I can join. If one of the options of the group system is, as a group owner, I can define what information I need from users, things like that. Let's go ahead and accept it. All right, so if I jump back over to my original account and refresh this page, we should now see that there it is, tiki@anl.gov has been added as a member of this group. So given that, let's go ahead and share with that group. Right, so let's say select a group, search for the Tiki project team is right there. We'll even give them read-write permissions on this, add permission. Right, so I've now given the Tiki project team rights to this group. And actually, you know what? I don't want to give the whole, I don't want to give them access to the whole folder. I don't trust them that much. So let's actually only give them access to one folder within this endpoint. So I'm only going to actually give that group access to the experiment 1 folder there, right? So now we can see the permission is tied to that one folder. And all of these permissions, to the question Vass asked, is that all of these access control permissions are stored in the Globus cloud service. And so it's all managed on our side. And the reason for that is because in these guest, sort of these sharing accesses, Globus is basically coming into the local system and saying, I have a guest request, a sharing request for a particular user to this particular endpoint, but everything locally happens as the owner of that endpoint, in this case, my TKU Chicago, right? So I've done the share. So let's jump out, go back over. You see I've moved over now to my SJT account, this other account in the other window that has this endpoint. If I search for webinar share, there it is. I can select it. And now I have access to only that one folder within that shared endpoint, right? Because remember, the access control permission I set was only allow the project team, this group, access to the one folder. So that's what I have access to. So now I can go into it. And also recall that I gave full read-write access here. Let me remove that for a minute. So now I only have given read access. So if I go try, say, create a folder in here, this should fail, right? Because I don't have write permissions on that folder. If I go back, add write permissions back, try it again, I can now create a folder in there. Go into that misspelled folder, pick a couple files over here at NERSC where I'm logged into as this other user, and upload data into the University of Chicago, into that one folder that's been shared with me. Or if I want to download some data, maybe there's something in here that has been shared out to me, I can say, let's take this file 1. We'll go into this dataset folder and download it, right? So sharing, right? So again, what just happened there? As a user over here in this account, in my main TKU Chicago account, I logged into University of Chicago cluster, said create a shared endpoint on this one folder, so you can think of it as sort of a change-rooted folder from the perspective of everyone else. I shared out this one folder within that endpoint out to this group. This other user who is a member of that group was able to come to that endpoint without having an account on the University of Chicago cluster, subject to the access control permissions that I set on that, and got access to that folder with read or read-write permissions based on those access control, right? So hopefully you see here, right, very trivial to now share data directly from your systems to your other users, again, without having to sync through cloud storage or go through us. So you get all the benefits of the transfer and all that sort of stuff without that. All right, so that's sharing. Any questions?
So there were questions about permissions and ownerships of files, which I addressed mostly online, especially on the question of permissions and maintaining those. There's a lot of sort of tricky nuances that I referred folks to FAQs. Just a couple other questions here. How long do keys last?
Keys for, as in for access to a system, to be able to, the credentials to log in, right?
Yes.
Yes, good question. So this is where shared endpoints and what we call host endpoints or normal server endpoints like Midway are different, right? So in the case of Midway, if I go out and look in the endpoints page, I look at, say, recently used, we should see Midway here. You can see credential expires in 10 days, right? So that means that login I did to University of Chicago that's allowing me to log in as a local University of Chicago account onto Midway is good for 10 days. After that, I'll have to re-log in. If I have a transfer that's longer than that, or that happens to be running when that credential expires, Globus will do the right thing. It'll suspend that transfer. They'll send you email with a link that you click on to come back in here, re-log into University of Chicago, and then the transfer will pick up right where it left off, right? So, and I can control that. And if I want to really deactivate things, that deactivating credentials means basically delete those credentials. For a shared endpoint, the model is different, right? And what's going on under the covers with sharing, of course, is that, when I accessed, oops, wrong window here. When I accessed this webinar share endpoint, I'm doing this, think of it as a guest, right? As this other account that that University of Chicago doesn't know anything about, right? What University of Chicago knows about is this user, right? The local Tiki account that somebody logged in and created the shared endpoint, right? So all of the access to this webinar share endpoint is happening as the local user Tiki on this system on behalf of this guest that the Globus is doing, is managing for them. So everything locally, permissions-wise, all that is happening and subject to the local Tiki permissions. But a benefit of that is that there doesn't need to be this sort of local credential activation, right? Is that the user has logged into Globus, right? Over here, I've logged in, and now I have, essentially think of it as indefinite access to this shared endpoint, right? So this is really useful, particularly when you want to start building more automated stuff, right? So if you want to automate recurring transfers or things like that may be running for months or longer, is if you do that against a shared endpoint, you don't have to worry about all these local credentials expiring, and the Globus level authentication services are sufficient for managing access to these systems.
Okay, let's move on, Steve. I know you've got a few more things to cover. There's a ton of questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but let's try and get there in about the next 15 minutes or so.
All right, so really already talked about groups, already talked mostly about identity linking. I mean, the key point on identity linking, again, is why the reason being logged into this account allows me to get access to that shared endpoint is because tiki@anl.gov, which is the member of the group that was shared to, is linked to this account, right? And you can link simply by add linked identity. It just walks you through the flow of linking other identities. So the idea is you can link together your various identities. And the big thing this does is solves the problem, for example, that if you ever shared things with people in Google Docs and had this question of which of their 5 Google accounts do I share a Google Doc with, this sort of solves that problem. You share it with the one that's the right one for you to share with based on their identities and what you think of them. And now, as long as I'm logged into the account that has that identity, it's set, everything just works. I don't have to sort of put myself in the right account in order to get shared access to that endpoint, right? So that's what linking does. The last thing I'll show here is demo in this part is the console. So this need to be in this account. So again, if we go back over this page, so far everything I've shown you is functionality from the end user perspective, scientists using Globus to manage their data. We also, to subscribers, provide a console, an administration console or management console that allows the administrators of your endpoint to see everything happening on your endpoint, right? So you can see your traffic. So I have rights to see all the endpoints owned by Exceed, by University of Chicago, that particular, UCRCC, and my own, right? So I can see what's happening on this system, some clever hover over animation, so I can see current activity, endpoints that are over here that I can drill into. So I can even see, like on Midway, all the endpoints here. I can see more information about these endpoints. So lots of stuff here. I can also see all the activity happening on these endpoints. So for example, if I go into tasks and say, show me all the endpoints, all the activity going on right now against the University of Chicago endpoint, but only show me those with faults. Let's see if any show up with faults. Nope. Oh yeah, got a couple. Some with faults, one was canceled. I can drill in, see more information about what sort of faults happened in these. So just like a user can see the event log, as administrator, I can as well. Right? So this gives me a way to proactively intervene on my user's behalf on their use of my system. Right? So it looks like they had some connection reset errors, but Globus just recovered from them and it completed. Also have the ability to pause and resume transfers of my user. So if I want to, users causing me trouble, or I have a system I want to bring down for maintenance, I can pause any tasks, bring the system down. When I come back up, resume them, and they pick up right where they left off. Right, so that's the management console. So let's keep moving. I got some more material, and we're getting on our time. So to push on, some couple things coming down something coming down the pipe here. Today we have a command line interface based around an SSH-based model. We have a whole new, which I won't really talk about here. We have a whole new command line interface coming down the pipe very soon here which kind of follows, if you've ever used the Amazon Web Services command line interface, is sort of follows that overall model where I can, it's a command line or I do Globus transfer, blah, 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 right? So this will, gives full capabilities through command line, fully scriptable, and we have authentication models that make it very easy to do long-running things. So you can, if you want to use the Globus transfer command from within a cron job against a shared endpoint, just works, right? So you don't have to worry about all the security, all that sort of stuff. So we know how to make all that work well. Storage connectors, right? I mentioned at the beginning, it's bring your own storage. So we support a bunch of storage systems and are adding more all the time, right? So standard storage connectors are the POSIX, essentially any POSIX file system, the Linux, Mac, Windows, cluster file system, stuff like that. And then we have what we call premium storage connectors, which are things like HPSS, mass storage system, HDFS, Hadoop file system, Amazon S3, Ceph, SpectraLogix, Black Pearl, object storage appliance, Google Drive's coming soon, right? Different connectors that allow Globus to work with these different sorts of systems. So if there's ones you're interested in, let us know. So let me move on to data publication discovery. I'm not going to spend nearly as much time on this. I just want to give you a flavor of what this looks like. And if you're interested, come talk to us more about this. So again, publication discovery, everything I've shown you so far is at the file and folder level, right? So what about when I want to publish data sets associated with a paper? So I want to have metadata associated with that, digital object identifiers. I want to allow projects or project data curators or librarians to manage collections of data and have policies around that and curate the data, allow search for all that, right? That's what this is about, right? So again, use cases is the simple canonical one in some sense here is I just wrote a paper. I need to make the data available with it. How do I do that? Right, and this is what you'll see in a moment in quick demo of what we do right down the middle, right? So provide the metadata, manage curation workflows, assign persistent identifier, and then make it available so people can search for it and download that data. But the Globus publication service is much richer than that in what it allows. It's not just simple publication in public settings, right, that are to public availability. We have lots of different knobs on this that you can control as a collection administrator about your data collections to allow it to be used in different use cases. So, digital object identifiers are great for some of these publication use cases, but for other cases, it's not so good because there are some contractual legal requirements around the longevity of that identifier and things like that. So there may be reasons to use the handle system or even just simple URLs, URIs. Descriptions, right? Everything from maybe I don't want any metadata to standard metadata like DataSite or Dublin Core to domain-specific, science-specific metadata to fully custom metadata, right? So I want to allow publication along this spectrum. Curation, right? And maybe I don't want any curation. I want to set it up so that anybody who is in a particular group can publish. So maybe I have my lab or my project is set up so that all data sets can be from everybody in the project can be automatically published into that without the need for curation. Or maybe I want some acceptance and even validation of the data sets. Access control, right? Who has access to this data? Anyone anonymously through HTTP, public users where they're authenticated, but anybody can get it, embargoed, all the way down to restricted to only collaborators, specific users and groups. And preservation, how long and how is this data kept around? And to first order, that's a question of the storage system, right? Because ultimately, the way Globus publication works is this is a layer on top of sharing. All the data is stored in a shared endpoint, subject to the workflow tools of the publication system and the search system. So this allows much richer uses than publication than just, I published a paper, I need to make data publicly available. We see people starting to use it for things like raw data. So in this example, a sequencer is producing raw NGS data. There's some automated metadata that's made available with it. They want to get some sort of identifier with it, maybe a handle, maybe not a DOI. But they want to do this so that they have sort of they've captured the workflow and captured the data set and some of the metadata around it and made it available, but they maybe put it on high durability archival storage that doesn't cost very much for long-term storage. Fine. But maybe downstream from that, I have others who are taking that data and doing analysis of it and producing more intermediary products, derived products from that data, but not yet ready for publication. They want to share it out, make it available. Again, can do all that. And so let me give just a very quick demo of the publication service to show you what this looks like. And you all can do this as well, right? So we have a trial publication service available, open to anybody, with data sets that you can just submit to. So let me show you what that looks like. So we got to trial.publish.globus.org. The real one, the real data that's hopefully not all crufted up like the trial one has been, is just on publish.globus.org. Let me go ahead and log in. It has single sign-on. Since we've logged in this browser already, I can do it. So let me go ahead and submit a data set to a collection. Actually, let me first show over here in this other window where I actually have admin privileges and curation privileges on in a collection. Let me just first show what a collection looks like briefly. So let me get logged in here as well, right? So recall, this is the SJT account over here. Let's go ahead and look at some of the collections. The model is you have communities, which are just named hierarchies, and then within the community, collections. And a collection is just a set of data sets subject to policies around what metadata has available to it, who's allowed access to it, what are the curation policies, right? So this is, this as soon as I get to it, is the collection administration interface, right? Where I, as the collection administrator, can configure some of these things, give it names, I can give it license text associated with the collection, I can say where to put it. Any shared endpoint can be the storage for a collection. What sort of identifier scheme to use, handles DOIs, what sort of workflows and metadata. So in this case, it's set to use DataCite, mandatory and recommended and optional. You can have custom workflows by engaging with us, consulting with us to create these things. What sort of curation? Can the curators edit the metadata or only accept, reject? And then access control. Who's allowed to submit using Globus groups? Who's allowed to access the data? Again, using Globus groups or all users. And who are the curators? Again, just a Globus group. Right, so given all that, what I can do is, let's go ahead and submit to a collection as a user. So first thing I do is say, what collection? Let's go to this open trial curated one. First thing it's going to ask me is license, right? So as somebody submitting the collection, I can require that they sign certain license around contributing and, you know, for example, copyright assignment, or yes, I agree that this data in this collection can be redistributed under certain terms. Next, we have metadata, right? So this collection, again, is the DataCite metadata. So I'll give it a title. So we'll call it Tiki webinar publication type. Tiki, we'll do just the required fields here. Publisher will be Globus. Continue, right? So that's the first set of DataCite mandatory ones. This is the DataCite optional, so I can add keywords like webinar, Globus, you know, various things. If I want to do related to, so if I want it to reference a paper, I can do that here, paste in the DOI of the paper right here, and that'll be kept with the metadata. You know, and then DataCite optional, other metadata that I can do, and I can have custom metadata, all with these forms, right? So I've now agreed to license. I have assembled all the metadata for this data set. Now I have to pull the data itself together. We call that assembling the data. And so now you see it takes us over to a very, hopefully now familiar interface to you. And what it did behind the scenes is created a particular folder within that shared endpoint where I now assembled data, right? So a data set from Globus's perspective is just a folder. You can put anything you want into it, subject to any policies a collection owner might have, but that's up to the collection to decide, right? So I can say in this folder, you know, in this data set, I want to have two subfolders. One is they'll call it the raw data, and maybe a second folder that is the virtual machine images, VM images that were used to create it. And then in the raw data, I can go out to my Midway site and pick up some of the data from my project and grab a couple files here that were the raw data and upload them into the collection, right? So again, I'm just assembling the metadata in whatever method I want to here. I've done everything. All right, everything's good. Great, I've assembled my data. Let's go on and submit it, right? So we'll go into the last page where I can confirm what I've got. Yeah, I can see the metadata I provided. Looks like the transfers have all completed that I did to assemble data into that folder, finalize submission, right? So now, because this collection has been set up with curation, this has now been handed off to the curator, right? If I look at my dashboard, I can see data sets submitted for approval, but not yet actually published. So again, jump over to this other window where I'm actually a curator, refresh my dashboard as the curator, and now I see curated task waiting to be claimed. There's the one that I just submitted as the other user. Let's go ahead and claim it. Yep, let's go ahead and accept this task as a curator. I can now, as a curator, see all the metadata associated with it. I can go in and look at the data set. And if I click on this, it'll just pop open the transfer window. I can edit the metadata, approve, reject. So let's go ahead and approve this submission. And so what Globus is doing now behind the scenes is it's taking all of that metadata that I had entered as the other user into those forms, writing it out into the collection, into that shared endpoint, into the folder as a JSON metadata file, so that this data set is a complete freestanding artifact of the files and the metadata. And it's gone and created a persistent identifier. In this case, it's a handle, it could be a digital object identifier, and created a landing page for this data set where so think of this as now the URL, the persistent URL that anybody can go to. And if they go to it, this is the page they'll land on, the landing page that shows the metadata. I can get citations for this in various formats right at the top, or I can download the data, right? So now I can go from there, and again, it'll take me out to the transfer service. It'll set the left-hand side to this endpoint, and there's the metadata, the Globus metadata.json file. The actual data I assembled is in the data subfolder. We're using a standard called Baggett for how we represent that out the data folder. And then I can go to wherever I want to and just download it just like any other transfer. Right? At that point, everything else is transfer. And then the last bit to show on this, if I pop back out a few levels, oops, popped out one too many levels. Go back in. Is the last thing that Globus did with accepting that into the collection is now made that data set available for search, right? So now if I search for webinar here in the search page, that should turn up this publication. Yep, there it is. If I click on it, it'll take me to the landing page of that publication, and everything is just as I showed you, right? So that's Globus publication and discovery. I think that is it on that topic. Yep. Any quick questions on that? I know we're getting a little short on time, so I think we'll probably have to take a lot of these questions more offline, but any quick questions?
Steve, just not specifically on publication, but just there were questions stacking up on support for different types of systems, specifically options for getting data into and out of S3, support for ZFS, and access to Google Compute and/or Galaxy Main.
All right, so each of those in turn. S3, we have a new premium storage connector that we're beta testing now. If you're interested, drop us a note at our support@globus.org, support@globus.org, and we can get you hooked up here. For ZFS, that's just a POSIX file system from the perspective of Globus Connect server. So yeah, there's a bunch of sites using ZFS already. The other ones like Google Cloud Storage, Galaxy Main, some of those I don't believe are. I don't believe Galaxy Main's supported at this point. Google Cloud Storage is not, but Google Drive is. Again, send us mail at support if you're interested in these various systems. We'd like to know about it and can talk about how to make it happen.
Okay, then there were a number of questions about Globus and HIPAA compliance, compliance with export controls and other requirements like that.
Right.
Can you speak briefly to that?
Yeah, so on the HIPAA front, so the first statement is that Globus is not HIPAA compliant, meaning that we cannot do BAAs, business associate agreements, accepting legal liability for data yet. It's actually something we're working on. So hopefully in another, I don't know, 12 or 18 months, that's hopefully something we'll be able to offer. However, we have had several universities, Indiana's a good example, that has done a risk assessment on Globus for use in IRB protected data, so HIPAA alignment, and specifically to be able to handle IRB data, and has approved it, right? So we do have various universities using it for those purposes. We definitely have a lot of users using it for schlepping around human genomics information. So we're partway down the path, but have a ways to go. Beyond that, nothing with respect to export control. We're also starting to investigate FedRAMP support particularly for federal agency use. Anything else? I mean, we should move on.
Yeah, just one quick question: whether or not Globus publication can be integrated with a local instance of dataspace.
With a local instance of dataspace.
I'm not sure if that should be DuraSpace or dataspace.
I'm not familiar with that one, so I can't answer that question.
Okay.
All right, so let's push on. So far what I've showed you is asynchronous bulk data transfer, right? That is, got these storage systems out there connected to the Globus cloud that I can do these asynchronous transfers on, but these are not web resources, right? I can't go to them via HTTP and link them into HTTP services and do browser-based uploads and downloads and all sorts of interesting stuff one can do with HTTP. And so this picture here is Sir Tim Berners-Lee. It's actually a little later picture because it's not his next computer, but he had this comment about the vision of the web of a single global information space. And to some extent, we've failed abysmally on that within the research community, right? All this research data is living on all these file systems that are not part of the web, that I can't link to, that I can't tie into that ecosystem until now, right? So this is a new feature that we are now in beta testing of in Globus that provides, as part of the Globus Connect server, in addition to the grid FTP asynchronous transfer, allows access to these endpoints, makes your research data storage a first-class entity on the web, right? That you can continue to do the asynchronous bulk transfer, but with all the same security as you saw with sharing, with all the same users and groups and access control policies, you can get to those files via HTTPS and OAuth, right? Standard web protocols. We'll be enhancing the Globus web app over the next months to add things like browser-based upload, download from endpoints, inline file viewers, things like that. But it's also a really critical part of what we'll talk about in a moment around platform, allowing integration of other clients and other web applications to make better use of your storage, right? So really making these endpoints much more available. And that really leads me into the platform. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes just introducing this. I'm not going to spend any real time on this within this webinar, because we have various other events I'll talk about at the end that you can learn a lot more about this, right? But if you think about what cloud has done, right? Everything I've shown you today is living at this software as a service layer at the top, right? The web app, mobile apps, things like that. Of course, we actually run Globus on Amazon, all EC2 and all these sorts of things down here. But there's this whole other layer in platform as a service, right? All these interesting services, not just virtual machines and storage, but queuing systems and databases and all this sort of stuff that's available as platform as a service that has really changed how applications get built in the commercial world, right? So we're trying to bring that to our ecosystem. And so a couple of examples of the questions we're trying to answer through our platform is, how do I leverage, as a non-Globus person, right? Somebody building a web application for science, how do I leverage the Globus services from within my own applications? Or state differently, or different question, how do I add my own services to the ecosystem? We've done all this stuff to create the security infrastructures and stuff to do this. How do I leverage all that, right? Or more generally, how do we, as from Globus perspective, how do we empower the research community to create an integrated ecosystem of services and applications, right? How can you latch into this, extend the ecosystems? How can you do things like the NCAR Research Data Archive, a data archive of a couple petabytes of climate and environmental data, 30,000 users globally who go to this web application, log into it, and download data, increasingly terabytes of data and tens of terabytes of data from this thing as individual requests. And traditionally, it's been a big problem over the last several years to get the data as these data volumes grew by downloading them over the web, right? It was the HTTP servers and running all this was just not appropriate. So they asked, how could we use the Globus transfer service for this? And then later asking, how can they leverage the whole Globus authentication ecosystem for this? And that's essentially what we've got with the new Globus platform as a service that we announced this spring. We've enhanced it with various things. We've created APIs for a lot of the functionality you saw, and there'll be more coming to allow you to really latch into this ecosystem and build your own web applications. There's a lot of information out there on docs about this. We have transfer APIs. We have a Python SDK that wraps around these REST APIs to make it very easy to build stuff in Python against these REST APIs. And ultimately, what we're doing is making available a really kind of new paradigm for how to build data-intensive applications and web portals in particular, and mobile applications that leverage all this great infrastructure we have, right? To allow people to build browser-based and mobile applications that can, through their portals, they can leverage our security, they can leverage transfer, they can tie into the federated ecosystems, they can leverage all of these endpoints with high-speed networks and science DMZs to really provide the next generation set of capabilities. We've created a sample of this that's out on GitHub that you can even look at the code and sort of a prototypical example of how to do this. And then we are running a series of what we call Globus World Tour events, where we're running one-day developer tutorials to go into this in more detail. So, and then we also have various other events like Supercomputing coming up, where we're doing tutorials, and where you can visit us. Globus World in April is our annual conference. Encourage you to go off this globus.org events page to learn more about these events, where you can learn a lot more about some of these topics if you're interested. So that's all I'll say about platforms. Come tell us if you want to know more, and we can even do another webinar or something on that if you'd like. Subscriptions, right? Globus, as I said, we're a nonprofit. We're University of Chicago doing this for the community, but we've been doing this for a long time, and we've learned that if you actually want to be around for decades, traditional, federal agency funding models don't quite work. And so we've introduced what looks like a more traditional commercial subscription model for all the premium features of Globus, most of what you saw today, everything except essentially the basic file transfer. That basically allows you to add all this capability to your endpoints. And so, this is intended for campuses, campus research computing centers, facilities, things like that. So basic subscription with most of the functionality, and then some advanced capabilities like branded websites, so we can skin Globus for you, make it look like your site, plug in your own identity providers in common standard, but if you have more customized ones, you can do that. Premium storage connectors, right? If you want to connect to these more exotic systems, that's all part of the subscriptions. And just as a representative sample subscriber, these are some of our many subscribers out there, and we really want to thank our subscribers. Like I said, we're in this as a nonprofit to help this community and be around for a long time, and we really rely on universities and labs and projects subscribing to Globus to allow us to continue to innovate and bring these capabilities and provide this as a service to the community. So that's it, right? So again, big takeaways of Globus: the Globus SaaS, the software as a service, cloud layer, web application layer, developing advanced capabilities directly to end users, to researchers and centers to get their work done, and this new platform as a service really opening up opportunities for developers to extend all this, to build it into their own applications and bring more and more capabilities to our research communities. Right, to learn more and join our community, right, first try the service. Go to globus.org, log in, go at it, right? And some of the basic capabilities are free. Accessing all these endpoints is free. It's really the endpoint that's subscribing, not the end user, right? So you can go do all this stuff. Create your personal endpoints as I showed you here, server endpoints. If you have multi-user servers that you want to add it to, you go to resource provider guide. We have mailing lists, 3 lists, one for admin, one for developers, one for users. Subscribe to these, join the community there. We have run a help desk, a professional help desk that does a great job for answering questions. And ultimately, help us out by subscribing and allowing us to continue to provide this to the community. So I think that's what I've got. Any last questions before we wrap up here?
Steve, there was a couple of questions regarding the subscriptions and at what level are they just for institutions, and how the subscription model structured and what are the costs?
Yeah, so if you go out to the globus.org subscriptions page, you can see much more detail about the subscriptions, right? And what you see basically is, the free is just the transfer. We have a starter subscription that's just one endpoint, one we call a managed endpoint, or think premium endpoint, but it's really the standard subscription. And the standard subscription is basically the cost of it. It's sort of an all-in unlimited use, but it's scaled based on the size of the institution. So for example, we use the Carnegie Foundation ratings to scale the rates based on R1, R2, R3, et cetera, and then prices for supercomputing centers. And then for things that don't quite fit that categorization, talk to us, and we figure out a subscription that sort of makes sense based on the scale of the organization. And then to a university, these are subscriptions. They're university-wide subscriptions.
Okay, so I think we're a little past the time here. I just want to thank everybody. There were a few questions that I referred folks to offline, various links, and then if there were questions we didn't get to, please email those either directly to me, vas@uchicago.edu. I'm just putting that into the chat. Or you can email support@globus.org if it's related to some issue you're having or getting started. And thank you, everyone.
Or join the mailing list and post them there as well.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll hopefully see you in the Globus land.